So our first step in using a Revit architecture model and importing it to 3D Studio Max will be shown in this first video. So I have a model opened up here in Revit Architecture 2008, and the view that's selected is the view that's exported out of Revit Architecture. So I'm going to click on the 3D button on the toolbar there to go into my 3D view. And this is the view I want to export out, the 3D model, so that I can use it in 3D Studio Max. I'm going to export it out as just a CAD drawing, just a DWG file format. So it'll just be an AutoCAD drawing. So I'm going to File, Export, and CAD Formats. And in CAD Formats, I'm going to export out of here as an AutoCAD 2007 DWG file. And just go out to another folder here. And just going to save that out. I'm using all the default settings here. So I'm not making any changes. I'm making sure the current view is what's going to be exported. I didn't have to prep the model in any special way. I'm going under Options here now. And here under Export Options, I'm keeping everything as default. Under Solids here, I'm exporting as a polymesh. Notice the other option, I could export as an ACIS solid. I'm going as a polymesh because I want each surface to be a separate surface so that I can easily put materials on it in Max. If I export it as the solids, the ACIS solids, I could then also put materials on them, but I would need multi-sub-object materials. If I needed to do Boolean subtractions to change the geometry, I would have to export it out as a solid. So I've exported that file out and saved it. Now I'm going to open up 3D Studio Max here, and first I want to set up just my settings here under my user interface. So I'm going to go under Customize and go under the Default UI, or Custom UI and Default Switcher. And here's just an easy way. I'm going to Design Viz Mental Ray. It's an easy way to set up a lot of the default settings. I definitely want to use Mental Ray and take advantage of a lot of the new lighting features and a lot of the new materials that are in Mental Ray. So I'm changing that setting. Notice when I change that UI setting, I have to exit out of Max and reopen it. So I'm going to exit out of Max here now and reopen, and then all the Mental Ray settings will be there. So I've closed down Max, reopened. So now I've reopened Max. I'm going to go under Customize and Unit Setup. And I just want to make sure this is set to US standard. So it should be feet with fractional inches, just so that Revit model comes in at the proper scale. Typically generic units is the default, so you always want to double check that before you pull in and import your Revit model. So now I'm going to go under File, File Link Manager. And through the File Link Manager is how I'm going to bring that geometry from Revit into Max. So I'm going to File Link Manager. And the first step, you can see the File button there. Just click on File, navigate out to that AutoCAD DWG that I had exported out of Revit. And I'm going to open that up. And then a couple other settings we have to look at. Under Presets tab here, just make sure Revit is the preset that's highlighted. I'm just going to allow the presets for the geometry to work from Revit. Click on the Rescale button. Notice incoming file units changes to inches. So again, just to keep everything to scale. Attach the file. I click on that button. And then now we're linking that DWG drawing we exported out of Revit and pulling it into Max. So pretty quick process. As the model pulls in, now my File Link Manager, I could close out and then just start working with the model. So now I could add cameras and lights, any kind of animation I want to put in there. I'm just panning and zooming so I can see all my model there. I hit H on my keyboard to get my list of objects. So as you can see here, each 3D object type in Revit is imported into Max. So I've got each wall in here, I've got furniture, plumbing fixtures. So it makes it real easy to select the object when you want to select it to put materials on it, let's say. So that was by just hitting H on the keyboard. I'm going to go back into my File Link Manager for a moment. And this time go under the Files tab. Here you can see a list there that shows the file you linked from Revit. Now the Reload button here, if I wanted to, say, make a change back in Revit after I've started working with it in Max, I'd go over here under Advanced. I'd have to make sure Use Scene Material Definitions and Use Scene Material Assignments on Reload are both checked. So let's say I made some changes in Revit, exported back out as a DWG, used my file link manager to reload it back in. If I had materials that I made in Max already, those materials will stay there if I click on those two buttons. I could also detach this file. What I'm going to do in this instance for this project is bind it. And bind basically just removes that link. We're just taking all that model from Revit, pulling it into Max here. We can no longer go back and relink back to that drawing. So at this point, if you're going to bind it, it's just going to give you the option that you can't make, or you lose the option to make any changes back in Revit. So now here, I'm going to look at my materials. And right now, no materials are showing here. But if I click on this first button here in the material editor and look under my map browser, I'm going to click on Browse from Scene. And when I browse from Scene, you can see all the different materials here that were on the objects already. So there's some glass, metal, different grass and asphalt that was on the site. So there's several materials that were in Revit that have come in and remained on those objects. So they show up here. I could drag those over to one of the material slots in my material editor if I wanted to edit those. So our model is now imported, and now we're ready to do some modeling, lights, and materials.